Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining this session, an introduction to OpenNebula operations. My name is Alex, and we are going to talk about some cool OpenNebula. So just let me in the comments drop like exclamation mark or @ sign if you can see my screen well, if you hear me well, so I know that nothing needs to be adjusted and we can dive in. Right. Awesome. Thank you, Ray. I will assume that if it's good for one person, then it's good for the rest of the attendees. Right. So let's dive in. And what we are going to talk about today is the Sunstone. What is Sunstone? How to use it? We'll go through the some user settings. We will talk about the virtual networks. We are going to touch the marketplace and apps because that is a very important thing. And then we will discuss virtual machine templates as well as we will end up with the deploying virtual machine. Now, if you follow along, I hope you have all the prerequisites done. So you have OpenNebula deployment, deploy it using the mini one, and um, so let us begin. So first thing first, what is the Sunstone? So Sunstone is the graphical user interface, and it listens on 2616 TCP. Now we do have multiple Sunstones at the moment. We have the older one for backward compatibility, and then the new one. So if you install from Mini One, then you are typically running both. Now, the one that we are going to talk about today is 2616. That is the latest and greatest. So it has the built-in the code-based generated code-based MFA. And the cool thing that it is same for administrators, cloud users, or anyone using OpenNebula. It's going to have a different view that we'll touch in a moment, but the entry point is going to be the same, and it looks for, let's say, 90% the same to all of the users. Now, uh, this is the Sunstone, right? So as you can see, I've reached that via the 2616 slash FireEdge slash Sunstone. But basically, if you just type 2616, you are going to get redirected to the correct OpenNebula deployment. Now, the username and the password, I'm going to use one admin, and one admin is the top tier administrator, so the one that can actually do everything, destroy whatever it wants. So it's pretty much the most powerful user in the OpenNebula environment. And yeah, of course, I'm going to use a password. So once you logged in, you are welcomed by this interface. So that is the actual Sunstone. So we have some shortcuts here to quickly access your virtual machines, quickly access your virtual machine templates, quickly access images and virtual networks. Now, on the left panel, you can expand multiple tabs and access uh, multiple parts of OpenNebula, like for example, the host configuration, the user list, virtual networks, then data stores, virtual machine templates, and your virtual machines. Now, since I'm logged in as the one admin user, the most powerful user in OpenNebula environment, then I by default am using admin view, right? So on the left, on the right, you can see the view switcher, right? And the by default we are going with the one admin view, which is the like access to everything. Now, if we talk about the regular users, then the regular users are going to go either with the cloud view or user view. And as you can see, as soon as I clicked the user's view, the accessible parts of on the left-hand panel reduced drastically. So the idea of view is to declutter the interface. So uh, the those users who don't have permissions accessing specific parts of OpenNebula just not going to see them, right? Otherwise, they may access, let's say, host overview, and hosts overview contains all of your infrastructure, right? All of the hosts. And for whatever reason, this one is empty for them, then they will start complaining or thinking like you don't have any hardware behind that. But in reality, they just don't have access to that, and that's it. Simply as that. So why they should have access uh, to the pages where they can't view anything? No reason for that. That's why there is that uh, view, a more simplified number of views that can help you to just declutter and make it more simplistic and, well, easier to use, as users are not in general overwhelmed with whatever they see on screen. But we are going to proceed with the admin view. And the admin view, as I mentioned, that has access to every possible part of OpenNebula. Now, we also have general settings of a user, so what user can configure himself or herself, and these are this including the secure shell key. This includes user teams, so it can go either dark mode or light mode, or just simply following your operating system's interface. That's where you can enroll the MFA, and that's where you create labels. So the user settings are typically behind the settings tab on the left hand panel. So as you can see, once I've clicked, we can see the schema, which aka theming. So that's where you can set it to a dark mode, set it to a light mode, or just follow whatever system has for you. I'll proceed with the light mode just to make sure that my view remains constant, despite whatever it's going to happen on my computer. Now, then you have the other settings like secure shell public key. Now, secure shell public key is quite an important piece, to be fair. Um, First thing, it's if you installed from Mini One, then this one is configured automatically for you. So you don't need to enroll anything, and it just goes there and it's there. So if you are new user or you installed in any other way, then SSH public key field is going to be empty, and you will need to uh, add it there yourself. So this secure shell public key would be the key that by default is going to be placed on that remote machine to the authorized keys file. And then as soon as machine deployed, you can uh, access that virtual machine via the secure shell uh, using this key, this public key, right? That's why it's very important to enroll it, because otherwise you may have no access to your virtual machine via the secure shell, and you will need to rely to other things like, let's say, VNC connection, or add this key after that manually, which is not a big deal, but it's just something that you will need to keep in mind all the time. So as a good thing, add the secure shell public key to your user and enjoy the passwordless secure shell communication. Now, then these are the labels, right? So that's where you enroll the MFA. With the labels, that's what you can pre-create. So something like, let's say, dev. So dev label. Then you also can set the prod label, and then you can use these labels to label some of the resources in the uh, in the OpenNebula. So that's where you can create those labels as well. Quite useful if you would like to add some kind of an good order in your environment. Right. So um, all that's good, right? We have the Sunstone running, we have all everything accessible, and so on and so forth. But what's the whole point of having virtual machine if that virtual machine cannot connect to the network, right? So it must somehow communicate with the network, being accessible and serve the needs. Doesn't matter what it is. Is it the web server, database, or so on? Even internally, if you would like your virtual machines to communicate with each other, then these virtual machines must share network, right? So they must be attached to some kind of network. And OpenNebula supports plenty of different standards that are standardized and are used in the data centers. So you can have your virtual network in the bridge mode or bridge with security groups. You can use the Open vSwitch or Open vSwitch with VXLAN support. You can simply go with VXLAN, or you can just use the standard VLAN or .1Q standard, as well as OpenNebula has network templates, network reservations, and other useful things. For example, when it comes to network templates, you can create a template on how the network should look like with all the configuration, and then let users to deploy those virtual networks themselves. Or you may have a network reservation, which is also very useful if you just want to take a chunk of a network, reserve an X amount of IP addresses, and then hand over this network to some kind of user and not provide an access to the main network. So all the networks are controlled under the networks, virtual networks. That's where you create your virtual networks, right? Just click plus, and here we go. Now, first thing first, you must name your network somehow and assign it to a cluster. By default, all of the resources, virtual networks, data stores, and hosts are in the default cluster. So you can either just select it or leave it empty and let OpenNebula pick the cluster manually. So let it be VNet 2, right? So once it's there, once the virtual network naming has passed, you are going to get to the main network configuration. That's where you select what is the type of the virtual network. So is it bridged or bridged and security groups? Now, security groups is a very nifty feature that allows you to prevent traffic to either go in or go out to your virtual machine by by leveraging the hosts, let's say host firewall, instead of configuring firewall within the virtual machine itself. So that is a very good functionality. Although not every of the virtual network supports that. So if we look at bridged, only bridged and security groups allows that security group configuration there. So when it comes to security groups are supported by bridge and security groups network, .1Q, and VXLAN. Simple bridge or OVS at the moment are not supporting security groups. So keep that in mind. And there is always by default the default security group. And if you select this default security group, then everything will be able to go in and go out. So there is the default security group that pretty much allows any traffic to travel freely without uh, being restricted or something like that. Additionally, when it comes to bridged network, you can select the private host networking, so your virtual machines are not accessible from the outside of that host. Quite useful if you'd like to have some kind of an isolated network on a specific host. Unless it's the private host networking, as you can see, stuff just quickly disappeared. It must be bound to some kind of a physical device. So it might be ATH0, it might be, I don't know, bound 0, or whatever is configured on your system. When you create those type of a network, please mind that you must use the proper naming of the physical device. And this obviously going to create a bridge. So you may either name the bridge yourself or allow OpenNebula to pick up the name for the bridge. If you already have a bridge, so if it's already configured, then just, let's say, I already have a bridge that has BR0, so I can hook it up to already existing bridge without any issues. Right, so let's do, for example, this one, VLAN 100 and ATH0 as the example. Now, your virtual network supposed to have an address space, and this address space you should define how many unique addresses you are going to have there, and that is defined under the addresses tab. Now you have few options how to define this range. So it might be the IP based range, or it might be just simply Ethernet type of range. Now, if we select the Ethernet type of range, then your virtual network card on the virtual machine is going to get the MAC address and no IP address. Alternatively, you may select IPv4 or IPv6 or combined, and then configure the IPv4 as well. Please keep in mind. So, what this actually, if I'm going to place an IP address here, and let's say 10, 20, 30, 20 as the first address, and then 10 IP addresses or 100 IP addresses right from this IP address. Now, what by default is going to do, it is going to configure the network card on the VM as static, so with static IP address, and will configure this IP address there. Now, there is an option to use DHCP, external DHCP as well. Bear in mind, I will show you slightly later. Anyhow, in this case, IPv4, and the first IP would be 10, 20, 30, 20, and then 100 IPs from there. If you need to set multiple ranges, it is also possible. Right, so 10, 20, 30, 200, and then 10 IP addresses from here. And now I have two ranges. So if, for example, you have a network and you would like to dedicate the full network, let's say /24 to that, but you know that there is somewhere in the middle, historically, obviously, you have an X amount of IP addresses reserved for already existing devices or already existing VMs, and they're changing that would be a very cumbersome and very painful situation, painful experience. So what you can do, you can just, let's say, create a network address reservation A up to that IP address that already is configured, and then after that, yet another address range. So why not? It is completely possible. Now, security groups are right here if you would like to select them. And of course, you can select multiple. If you are going to proceed with security groups, please note that all these are allow actions, which pretty much, if you select the default, right, which allows anything in, anything out, then it is going to allow anything in, anything out. So there is no, all other rules would make no sense. Now, the quality of service for the inbound and outbound traffic can be configured right here. And then we go to context. On the context tab, you are going to set the gateway, the DNS server. So let's say 10, 20, 31, and 1111 as a DNS. Plus, you can adjust the network address and you can adjust the network mask as well as the IPv4, IPv6 configurations. Now, there is one interesting bit here, and that is the method. So, method defines how to configure a network interface in that network. And you have multiple options. You have skip, which do not configure IPv4 completely, static, which is going to be based on the context. So that is the default one, which takes this values and also values from the address page. Or you may pick DHCP. So in case of DHCP, the virtual network on the VM will, so the virtual network card on the VM will be switched to the automatic mode and will request an IP address from from the external DHCP server. So there are multiple ways how you can configure your virtual network and assignment of the IP addresses. Just so you know, the with the default setting, which is basically based on the context, it's the easiest way how to how to configure virtual network card on the VMs if you prefer static IP assignment. But obviously, you can pick the one that works you the best. So as soon as that virtual network created, we can start using it. Now, what are the other awesome bits of the network? Is the reservation. So the reservation allows you to reserve a chunk of the network and then place your virtual machines in that network instead. So what else is very convenient is that the reservations are going to inherit all the settings from that parent. So let's do a reservation. In the reservation, you select the range that you would like to use, right? So let's take this one. Then you can either point out to the first IP address or you may leave it empty. So the thing is that with the reservation, the IP addresses that are going to be in that reservation, they're supposed to be in a sequence. So let's say if I would like to set first IP address to 10.20.30.25, and I'm assigning 10, so I'm reserving 10 IP addresses from that network, I need to make sure that currently there is nothing that occupies IP address from .25 and until the .34, right? If there is something in the middle, I will not be able to create reservation with this setting. But if I still would like to, and let's say the IP address 30 is currently occupied, that what I'll need to do, I'll need to create, let's say, 5 IP addresses from the from starting from .25, obviously name, my new reservation, right? So it is right here. And then I must click reserve once again. And instead of adding to a new virtual network, I'll need to add to existing virtual network. Select the same IP range, but now instead of 25, I'll need to set 31 and then 5 IP addresses starting from 31. So this is how I can skip. So this is how I can easily skip an IP address in the middle, even at the for the reservations. So that is legit for the IP address reservation on the main network, the one that you've created first, and it's also true for the reservations. Now, your parent network, the VNet2 in my case, under the leases will have an X amount of IP addresses reserved for a specific purpose. If you need to, for example, that IP address of .30, we can actually also hold it. So in case you know that there is an IP address that you don't want to be distributed to other virtual machines or never to be reserved by the reservation, you just simply want it to be excluded, then you can hold this IP. As soon as you click hold and you enter the correct IP address, it is going to be appeared as IP on hold. You can release it anytime, but again, in this case, this IP address is not going to be provided to any reservation or any virtual machine. And as I mentioned already, that the reservations are going to inherit all of the settings that that come from the parent. So, for example, the VLAN ID, as you can see here, is 100. That was the exactly same VLAN ID that we've configured in our main network, right? So, same is going to be the virtual network type. It is .1Q, the same as for the parent network. And of course, network templates are configured right here. So you can create virtual network template with all of the configuration, and then users just need to name it, and they have the virtual network created for them without any issues. Now, it's all good. Having a virtual network is fine, but obviously, what's the whole point of having virtual networks if there is nothing to deploy? And for that, we we have a marketplace. So because you can create image yourself, but you also can use a pre-built images. And the marketplace would be the source of these pre-built images. Pre-built images are awesome for one particular reason. I mean, they're awesome in many ways, but there's one reason that makes them the best and the preferred way of deployment, and or even preferred way of using it as the starting point for your future deployments. So that is that these images are ready to use in the OpenNebula environment. You see, our vanilla images is basically the vanilla OS, right? So if we're talking about the Alma Linux, that would be vanilla Alma Linux. If we're talking about Debian, Ubuntu, that would be a Debian and Ubuntu vanilla images with a few modifications. And the best modification, or the biggest modification, is the contextualization package. So this contextualization package, a specific package that makes all the magic happen. When you deploy a virtual machine with contextualization package, it allows OpenNebula to perform the configuration of networks, it allows OpenNebula to make some adjustments and make sure that the virtual machine that you deploy has all the necessary configurations in place. So for that, there is that contextualization package that makes the deployment of these virtual machines very convenient. If we would install it or create our image from scratch, we will need to make sure that the contextualization package is there. Don't get me wrong, you still can run a VM without the contextualization package, but well, you kind of losing a lot of functionality there. That's why, as I mentioned, I would consider having this package is a must. Now you'll need to add it to your virtual image, and that is possible using the One Apps repository. So we have a dedicated tool set to cook your images in the way you wish. But alternatively, if you can get away with running the vanilla OS, then why not run the vanilla OS and just reduce the work that you need uh, to invest in order to maintain those images and so on and so forth. Now, going back to the initial idea, so that these images are kept in that marketplace. And we have this public marketplace, and that is ready to go, and you can find it under the storage marketplaces. So there too, the Linux containers is disabled by default, and OpenNebula Public is enabled by default. So OpenNebula Public contains all of the images that we are maintaining ourselves. So pick one. How to get to those images? Just click Apps. So at this point, it's very important to understand one key concept. There is an image, and then there is the virtual machine template. In OpenNebula, you're not deploying virtual machine from an image. You are deploying virtual machine from the virtual machine template. The virtual machine template would be the configuration, the definition of the configuration for your future VM. So it's going to contain the hardware that this virtual machine will receive, and then is going to contain the virtual networks that this virtual machine will have the virtual network cards in, and also the images that will be attached. Now, image, in the other hand, is a snapshot of a disk, right? So images can be found right here under the storage images, and that is the snapshot of a disk. It can be the simple snapshot, right? So a simple disk with some files. It may be an empty disk. It may be the CD-ROM read-only CD-ROM drive, or it might be the bootable operating system. So image is pretty much anything here, right? And your virtual machine template can have multiple images attached, which again is a good way, right? Because you may want to keep your files uh, on a separate partition, on a separate disk, and your OS on on another separate disk, right? So that is the way to do it, and that's why you may want to have a different image. Now, in the apps, you can get the images and the services. So if you see service, that means that it's not a vanilla OS, it has some kind of application. In our case, you can see that there is a service mini IO, there is the service virtual router, there is the service WordPress, there is service harbor, and so on and so forth. So there are different services that are going to deploy the virtual machine with some kind of application. Or there is something like vanilla image, for example, Ubuntu 24.04, and you can import that. So when you click the import into the data store app, you have this small switcher, and it is enabled by default and let it stay so. Why? Because in this case, what we are downloading, we're not only downloading the image itself, but we are also going to download the virtual machine template. And yeah, it's going to be the default virtual machine template. It might not suit your needs and it will require an adjustment, but this can be used as the very good base for your custom virtual machine template. And the good thing is that multiple virtual machine templates can reuse the same OS image. So you may just import that, clone it, adjust it, and then the default one and the custom one will reuse the same virtual machine image. So I would really recommend to download. But there is one catch. Let's say you will not be able to download it twice with the same name. So if you already have Ubuntu virtual machine template or Ubuntu image with this name, you may just add something like v2 and then it is going to save it with the following name, which again is the way to go if you already have this VM template or and VM image in your on your data store. And then we must place it onto the data store. So the data store by default, we have image, we have three data stores by default, and each data store type serves for its own purpose. There is the system data store that keeps images of running virtual machines. Then there is the image data store where all your images will be stored. So when images are at rest, they reside on that image data store. And then there is also the files data store where you're pretty much going to keep your plain text files or any other files that you would like to be dropped to your virtual machine. But for images, remember you need to store it onto the image data store. Click Finish, and you can see that the image with ID1 and VM template with ID1 both are created. So we just need to wait a bit. Why I say wait a bit? Well, because we have two parts, right? We have the image and we have template. Template is pretty much a textual representation, a bunch of text. So if you are in the command line, this is how the virtual machine template looks like. As I mentioned, a bunch of text, right? While the image is, well, a snapshot of a disk. So virtual machine templates are lightweight. That's why you will get them pretty much fast on your disk, while uh, the image may be heavier, like 4 gigs, 10 gigs, 15, 20, whatever is the actual weight of that image, and it may require a little bit more time to be downloaded. And obviously, all that depends on how fast is your network and how you are uploading that image. So keep that in mind that once you click import, you see that successful banner on the lower right corner. That doesn't mean that you can just go in straight instantiate it. Check the images first. Make sure that the image is also in the ready state. As soon as image is ready, you can go ahead and deploy your virtual machine, which leads us to the VM template. So, as I mentioned, virtual machine template is the way how you uh, will deploy your virtual machines. So you will need that virtual machine template. And as I mentioned before, virtual machine template is the textual representation of a VM. So how your virtual machine is going to look like. So it's a bunch of text. What it includes a set of images, virtual NICs, and various parameters. Some of these parameters will describe the hardware that your VM is going to get, some of the parameters are actually going to perform the post deployment configuration, right? When you deploy a VM from the virtual machine template, some of the settings can be adjusted. Some of these can be adjusted only by the administrator. Some of these can be adjusted by the user who instantiates the template. For example, by default, if I'm going to try to instantiate the Alpine Linux, I can adjust the memory, right? I can adjust the CPU. And if I will switch to the user view, the physical CPU adjustment obviously disappears. Now, the number of VMs to deploy, the name, and so on and so forth. So there is some flexibility even when you deploy the virtual machine from the virtual machine template. However, virtual machine template is much more than what a regular user going to see, right? So let's update it and let's have a look at the Alpine Linux 320. Now, we have the memory that will be reserved for this virtual machine. So we can, let's say, change it to 512. Then you can instantiate this virtual machine as a different user, because in the end of the day, when you deploy a virtual machine, it's going to have an owner. And that's where you can define who is going to be that owner. By default, the owner is the one who deploys a VM. Also, the physical and virtual CPU assignment can be configured right here. And don't forget about the costs. So if you are planning to calculate the uh, consumption of the reservations of the resources, um, also uh, with the monetary uh, thing in mind, that's where you can set how much it costs to run this virtual machine. And then that would be per memory, per CPU, and for disk. At the end of the day, you will be able to generate a report how much a specific user or a user group owes you in cash. Right, so set the hypervisor to KVM. Then once you click next, you are going to go to the advanced options. And that's where a lot of magic happens. So first thing first, that's where you can attach more disks if you need to. And that's where you actually can also edit the current disk. So by default, the size of the disk equals the size of an image. What you can do though, you can grow this one, and instead of being half a gig, you can add a zero where the size on instantiate field is, and that is going to grow that disk to 5 gigs. Again, this is very convenient if you're planning to use this image for some serious workloads, but you don't want to actually change the image settings. You would like it to be as tiny as possible. So why not? And again, it's not always you need it to be deployed with, let's say, 50 gigs. Sometimes in some conditions, it's enough to only have 20 gigs. So that's where you can adjust it. Under the networks, that's where you are going to place the uh, virtual network card to a specific virtual network. Again, you can attach multiple network cards here. You can also create an alias if you would like your virtual network to have multiple IP address in the same network, but leveraging only one card. Operating system and CPU configuration is right here. PCI device pass-through right here. So you can configure the PCI device pass-through, right? But what I would like to touch on is the context, right? Because we can spend more than 1 hour discussing every possible configurable right here, but the context is very important. So what context does, the context, it allows you to configure the secure shell public key, and in this case, it could be a mixture, right? You can leave the user as a safe public key, which is going to take the public key of a user who instantiated the virtual machine. But what also you can do, you can add any other secure shell public key right here. So, for example, you have some Ansible deployment station, and this Ansible deployment station uh, or configuration station is going to perform the post deployment configuration. So, and this Ansible tool needs to configure, right, using the secure shell public key. So you may take the public key of that station and place it right here. So a lot of use cases why you would like to add any other public key right here. Now, another important bit here is the start script. So this start script will be executed on the startup of your VM. Basically, every time a virtual machine reboots, it is going to execute this start script. Let's do, I know, APK update as the example and HTTPD, right? Obviously, it's not going to start HTTPD because there is no HTTPD installed, but yeah, it's just going to perform the APK update. Now, then you also can request your users to uh, input some of these variables, and these variables are going to be um, presented in the VM itself. So you can configure some scripts to leverage these environment variables. So also you can map these to some specific parts. So we have a thing called context variables predefined that can configure your virtual machine. Let's say set the time zone, set the password, set the username. So instead of a root, it's going to be something else. So you can map those user inputs to these custom context variables, and then you are going to provide a user an ability to select those. So it's very convenient. Now, there is in the documentation, there is the whole list of all of the possible custom context variables that are going to do something, right? For example, as I said, set the time zone or set the host name, whatever. So let me set the time zone. I'm going to set the time zone to Europe, right? Riga. And let's also change the password, let's say to OpenNebula, right? And yeah, so that is going to set the password to OpenNebula for a root user, and it's going to configure the time zone is going to set it to Europe Riga. Awesome. That's it. Again, there is a lot more you can do, and obviously documentation has all the lists, so there is no point of me telling one by one what you can do there. But just so you know, that would be a very, very good example. Obviously, it's supposed to be in the correct format. I don't recall to which position the slash should go, so that would be a good experiment. Right. And then you save this virtual machine template. Now there's another catch right here. So by default, if you installed from Mini1, the DNS server would be the 172, so the private IP address, which is not suitable, at least to my environment. So I will need to change. I will need to edit the DNS from 172.16.101 to something like 1111, just to make sure that this thing works. Okay. So, and now let's instantiate a virtual machine. So when you instantiate a virtual machine, you can instantiate multiple number of virtual machines with the same configuration. So let's say I'm deploying it and I would like it to be 1 gig instead of 512 megs of memory, right? So instead of every time starting a VM and then change this, I can say, okay, I would like to have 2 VMs with the same configuration. Now, it also can have a specific name. So, for example, custom. And then you can use a very convenient hint, percentage sign IDX, which is going to place the specific ID of that VM within this deployment to the name. Again, very convenient. If I'm going to leave this blank, then it is going to take the name of a template and will add the ID to the template, which not always a good choice, right? So sometimes you'd like it to have a specific name. So custom dash IDX. So as I mentioned, we can also change some of the settings like storage, like network, placement to define where this virtual machine is going to be deployed. So you can either do it out on the automatic mode, or you can pinpoint a specific host where you would like this virtual machine to be, right? So some scheduled actions and the boot order of the virtual machine. Just click finish and see how this one is going to get deployed. Now, virtual machines, as I mentioned, these can be deployed in batches. By default, it also allows the VNC communication. So you can have the virtual terminal, the virtual screen, and you can observe the start of the VM and then later access the virtual machine using the VNC, and then you can back those virtual machines up and turn them into an image. So let's say you have a VM that is running, you made some adjustments, and then you would like all your future VMs to use this image instead of the one that you used before. So you can actually take a snapshot of that disk, turn it into an image, and then use that. Right? Cool. As you can see on the right, the VNC icon is there. So if I will click, that is the terminal window. So if I will say that I am root and I will enter a password OpenNebula, as you can see, I have the access to the command line of a host. That's due date. And as you can see as well, that I've just printed out the date that is configured. So the Eastern European Summer Time Zone, that is my zone, and that what I've placed inside of the time zone custom context variable, which is again very useful if you'd like it to be in a very specific time zone and you don't want to run any post deployment scripts. Just reuse that nifty trick. Now, as I mentioned as well, if you go to storage, you can save disk, you can create a snapshot, you can resize a disk. But please don't mess up the disk snapshot with the VM snapshot. These are two separate things. One is the virtual machine snapshot that snapshots the virtual machine, memory, and so on and so forth. And then there is the exclusive disk snapshot that can be placed right here, right? So these are the things. Now let's do a snapshot. Why not? So let's take a snapshot. May have it without a name. Not a big deal. Snapshot is created. Now there is a question: how I can revert to that snapshot. So you see, the thing with disk snapshots versus the typical snapshot. So if the snapshot of the whole virtual machine is there, then you can revert to that snapshot while the virtual machine is running. Here's the button. Click and you revert it back. When it comes to a virtual machine disk, not the VM itself, then reverting to a snapshot you can do, but only when your virtual machine is powered down. And that's pretty much logical because there are a bunch of processes that may happen, may involve this specific disk, and then you suddenly do a revert of a snapshot, and then, well, different things can happen. So that's why the if you'd like to revert a specific disk from a snapshot, you must power down the VM. And additionally, let's say the uh, we forgot the password. So you no longer remember a password. Try root, try to type something, and it tells you that password is incorrect. What you can do in this case, well, you can edit the current context configuration. So open the VM, go to Configuration tab, click Update the VM configuration, go to Context. That's where you can change the context once you deploy the VM, right? And then scroll all the way down, locate the password. In case if it's not there, then create obviously the password variable, and let's change it. Let's set it to Open Nebula 123. That's it. Just saved, right? The virtual machine goes into a hot plug state, which means there are changes to be implemented. So let's refresh. Virtual machine is running. So let's try the VNC once again. Oh, sorry. It is root, open Nebula 123, and I'm in. Right. So you can reconfigure these things on the fly if you need to, right? So that is again very, very convenient in a lot of the cases. So that is it about the operations, right? I hope you've got something useful out of that. I hope you learned something new. And now let's have a look at your questions. Now, which data stores are those snapshots located? The snapshots are located on the system data store. Unless obviously you move it to an image data store to have it as an image. But if you just created this a snapshot, it is going to be kept on the system data store. Right. Do we have any other questions? Don't forget, so there are plenty more of the webinars. So feel free to sign up for the upcoming webinars either by myself or by my amazing colleagues. And we are going to discuss a lot of interesting stuff. Plus, there is always a recording of a webinar. So, for example, if you'd like to sneak a peek on what's going to be in the upcoming 7.0 version or uh, anything uh, anything else, then yeah, feel free to check out our YouTube channel. Well, when 7.0 going to be released, obviously we are going to do a plenty of awesome videos for sure. So stay tuned and follow us to know when we are going to make a lot of cool videos about the 7.0. Right. So don't forget also to join our community. We have a wide community, and our forum pretty much answers almost every question that you may have. And if it's not there, then feel free to ask for assistance, and you will get an assistance by the community. So, forum is the way to go. Don't forget also about our documentation. We have a very, very nice documentation with a lot of examples. Right. So I don't see any other questions. So which means that we are basically on time. And well, thanks for joining in. Thanks for staying tuned, and see you in the next webinar.